Welcome, Ashok. It's an honor to have you on the session today.
Hmm.
Krish Ashok needs no introduction. He is a man who dons many hats. He is an electronics engineer by training, a software engineer by profession. In fact, he is the global head of AI cloud services at TCS. He is a trained Carnatic violinist, in addition to being a skilled guitarist and cellist. Goes without saying, he's a social media influencer with hundreds of thousands of followers on Instagram, YouTube, and Twitter. He is a well-known blogger and columnist. And above all, he is the author of the bestseller, Masala Lab, The Science of Indian Cooking. On behalf of ALA, Ashok, I'd like to welcome you to this session.
Thank you. Absolute pleasure.
I want to start off today's session with a question based off of your introduction. You have expertise in various domains. Why did you choose the subject of the science of cooking as the basis for your book? What was the inspiration? And what was the moment for you like when you realized this is it? This is what I'm going to talk about.
Sorry, one quick thing. I'm audible, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, super. All right. Yeah. So science for me was, in a sense that actually when I was growing up, as you all know, right, and that in general, that memorization is how you do well in the Indian schooling system. And I was very bad at that. And so my coping mechanism, in fact, I was one of those kids who did not do very well till class 8 and then started doing well from class 9 onwards, because class 9 usually represents that hard switch to physics and mathematics, where it is possible to do well without memorizing stuff. In that if you get it, you get it, right? And then you can build everything else from first principles, right? I mean, you didn't have to memorize huge volumes of stuff. You didn't have to memorize history. You didn't have to memorize all of those poems and so on. I think so in that sense, I think for me, science has just been a way to break things down to their absolute first principles. And then also that way be honest about whether you truly understand something or not. Right. And the other thing is that I also felt that so India is notoriously a culture with one of the greatest diversities of food, one of the most astonishing food cultures in the world. And yet there are a single digit number of historically well-known cookbooks. Right. Ask most people to name a cookbook from the past, and they would not know. Right. If you ask an expert, every expert will say the same, Manasolasa from the 13th century, and so on. Or they'll quote mythological, oh, King Nala and so on. But there is no book of recipes that King Nala or anyone else did. And so we've been a oral knowledge transmission culture. We've also been a patriarchal culture where mostly women did the cooking. And so women did not have access to education till very recently and so on. So it was all orally transmitted kind of knowledge. And it struck me that when I set out to write this book about cooking, it struck me that what was missing was an ability to look at what our grandmothers and mothers do, which is essentially chemical engineering in the kitchen. But they may not use chemical engineering and chemistry and biology and formulae to describe it. But what they are doing is effectively chemical engineering, and so it felt like no book had been written about that, and so I ended up choosing that. And so, in a sense, I think the novelty of using science to describe Indian cooking also played a role in the book doing well, particularly obviously, as you can see, amongst NRIs as well, because predominantly a lot of science and engineering kind of people from India ended up going overseas and so on. Again, and so I think it and what also I guess what the book really does is that it, in real contrast to what I end up doing on Instagram, nearly 95% of the book is basically a validation of what our mothers and grandmothers do. Is that, oh, this is why they do it. Right. Although, my subsequent social media persona is like, this person is making this crazy claim and using the word Ayurveda for it, but that's not really true. Kind of gives the sensation that I'm actually against all of that. It's not true. So I tell most people that just read the book. Actually, incidentally, it is very much a validation of what our mothers and grandmothers do. If anything, on a lighter note, when it comes to food, listen to your grandmother and don't listen to your grandfather. Your grandfather is usually a source of WhatsApp forwards and a source of usually things that make more work for your grandmother, right? Rather than actually without helping in the kitchen. So in that sense, I think science was merely just a language that allowed that kind of knowledge to be documented for the next generation without it being lost amidst, interpretation and tradition and all those other words. And science is a precise language, right? And so, the next generation can just read and say, oh, this is exactly why it happened. So it's not something that you're going to lose or get confused.
Right. We are, in fact, going to touch upon some of the aspects that you covered in your response, namely patriarchy and a lot of those. But I wanted to finish the first section in my questionnaire because I wanted to start it out with what inspired you and then move on to the research process. But we will be revisiting some of those elements you laid out.
Sure.
When it comes to research, what was the process like for you? I can imagine that as someone who's rooted in science, someone who comes from a background in science and whose scientific temperament is in place. It's one thing to have that in place, and it's another to go out and research. I'm pretty sure it must have taken a lot of work on your end to research the process. What references or resources did you use, academic or non-academic, to sort of substantiate the message that you were trying to put across in the book?
Yeah, this was particularly hard because for the most part, I think which is why a lot of the basic content of Masala Lab just comes from my 20 years in the kitchen of just noting down what proportion of water to atta works, right? How much salt to add, or how to cook rice perfectly, and so on. And obviously, I think also learning it from my mother and my grandmother and the other experts in my family, if you will, right? Historically, I think the only scientific knowledge about food tends to come from food technologists and people who kind of make snacks and biscuits in factories. Right? So there's never really any science book for home cooking at all. It was quite surprising. Even catering textbooks, which I really refer to, right? The guys who teach, 5-star chefs to cook, you'd be surprised by how devoid of science they are. They just very much just do this, but they never tell you why, right? Which is part of the reason why I think the book also did well with chefs, because a lot of them with the scientific temperament were not being taught that way, right? And so in that sense, I think it had to be a combination of catering textbooks and food technology textbooks, and obviously a lot of white papers, and to be honest, a lot of food science books from the West, where there's been at least a 40-50 year sort of maturity in thinking about how to bake perfectly, how to make, pasta perfectly, and so on. And you can then extrapolate that, because at the end of the day, I think, it's, chapati works the same way, or, rice works the same way, regardless of, which cuisine it actually refers to. And in that sense, so I would have to give a lot of credit to Harold McGee and, Kenji Alt Lopez and the others who, in the US, kind of been thinking about Alton Brown and so on, who've been thinking about food through the lens of science. And a lot of their ideas and their books also are very key references for Masala Lab. But I would say the 3/4 of it is just simply experimentation at home to see what works and what doesn't.
And Ashok, it's interesting that you bring up those examples, because one of the things that really struck me in your book, I think it has to do with the chapter on spices, one of your earlier chapters in the book, where I think there's this graphic where you list out all the masalas and the key ingredients that comprise the masalas,
Yes.
and you put a font size that corroborates the proportion of the spice in the masala. That's what really triggered this question for me, because I can't even imagine the amount of research that must have gone in for you to develop that grid. And I also wanted to.
I'll just say that, in fact, there was a very specific reason to use that font size thing, as opposed to simply say, list the masalas and give you the number of grams, right? And the reason I did that is because in India, if you go to every house or every state, the definition of garam masala, sambar masala, and all of that really varies tremendously. It varies by proportion, and so on. So I knew that if I put a number, right, and then I will essentially get people arguing with me that, no, this is wrong. And so a lot of things about Indian cooking, right, is the fact that it varies tremendously. There is no one right or wrong way to do anything at all. So I knew I needed a representation that gave you an approximate idea without necessarily hard coding some numbers to it. And this is a very common thing in India. And so that's the reason why I actually chose that visualization, as opposed to just putting numbers and putting the number of, the ratio or something like that.
Right. And I remember, I'm pretty sure this applies to most of us. Every time we call our moms or grandmoms or mother-in-laws for a recipe, they'll say something on the lines of "Korchu mallipodi" or "Ichiri molagu," and you are like, okay, it's
Yes,
open to interpretation. So that was helpful.
absolutely.
And I also like, when it comes to your writing style, the fact that you draw a lot of parallels and analogies. One thing that I found particularly interesting was how you mention how Western music has been well documented, so much so that in the present time and age, if someone were to replicate a symphony, you can exactly replicate the way it was intended to be, which is not quite true for Indian classical music. Could you care to elaborate a bit more on that and how that applies to the world of cooking?
So in a way, this is an extension of the earlier point I made about how there's very little documentation about Indian cooking till the 20th century, right? And so in a sense, I think, if you look at classical music, Indian classical music and Western classical music, uh, the one key difference is the fact that the notation of the Western classical music, see those symbols and so on, right? They are precise to the point of anyone can download that and then play it exactly as it was intended to be played. So the composer can convey with 100% fidelity exactly what he or she wanted that piece to sound like. Now, the rest is entirely up to the talent level and the skill level of the person playing it. But there is nothing lost in the communication of the musical idea to notation, right? On the other hand, just think about Indian classical music. Just think about what you see in notation versus how it's actually sung. There is just so much lost. There is just so much missing in terms of the bends, in terms of the pace, and when you lower the volume or at what pace you need to sing. None of this information is written down. The only way to learn it is to be with a teacher, is to be part of a school, is to be part of a body, is to be part of a gharana, um, and then practice that day in and day out and live and breathe that atmosphere. So anyway, I think so then let me look at it. So the negative way of looking at it is that it is designed to sort of keep this membership access. Only some people get to be students, only very few people get access, and so on, right? You can't Nobody can just democratically download some notebooks back in the day. Of course, now they can do on YouTube, which is a great democratizer, if you will. But back in the day, if you didn't have access to a teacher, you couldn't learn Carnatic or Hindustani music, right? But that was not true of Western classical music. The feature, on the other hand, right, if I had to look at it the other way, is the fact that the music is innately uh, putting a lot of onus on the individual to be creative in how they interpret, right? So no two performances, even by the same artist, sound exactly the same, right? Different students of the same school will sound different. They will improvise differently, and so on. So there is, in some sense, this idea that I cannot hard code all of that creativity, and I have to leave it to you to some degree. But I think the truth is somewhere in between. I think we clearly need to document it better, give a lot more information in the notation while still leaving flexibility for improvisation. I would actually say the right metaphor here is jazz, right? Jazz still uses notation, and yet jazz musicians use that notation broadly as a guide, but will improvise live on stage. And I think, so it is really, in that sense, I think this is Indian classical music is a lot more analogous to that, right? It's not like, oh, once written, this is the only way you will sing, and so on. So that, I think, this is a common problem that you kind of see with a lot of Indian art in general, right? It is very gate kept. It is very membership criteria driven. And it is very, very high touch, and not democratized in that sense. And yet at the same time, the nature of the pedagogy actually makes for a lot more unique creative expression live, if you will.
Fantastic. And a lot of the members in our group who are attending the call at the moment, many of them are renowned musicians. Some of them are outstanding singers, and a lot of them cook extremely well. And I'm sure a lot of the things you just explained are very relatable. So continuing on the same topic, Krish, I believe our understanding of the physical world around us is clearly rooted in science, right? And cooking is no exception to that rule. But there's, on the one hand, science notwithstanding, there's also an argument that says that there's a certain amount of art that's involved in cooking. And which brings me to the topic of kaipurnyam, or magical touch. which to some of us, or I would believe most of us in this group, is more like a glorification of free female labor in a patriarchal household. I think you
True.
touched upon that at the beginning. Is there any such thing as Skypunyam, or can anyone with a reasonable set of resources and tools be able to come up with a decent dish?
So it's a little bit of both, to be honest. As I said, I think, like with music, right? You can really practice 10,000 hours and get really good, but you still find that there are some people who just simply seem to be above the others, right? I mean, um, it's a combination of, so if I had to use scientific language, it's sort of like a level of kinesthetic and spatial intelligence around your hand-eye coordination and the flexibility of your larynx and so on, and your creativity that just makes you just a little bit better than others. And when it comes to cooking, right, it's a very multi-dimensional skill. It's fundamentally mostly your nose, 80% your nose, and obviously your tongue, and your eyes, and all the rest. Um, that isn't able to sort of coax a large number of ingredients into the right sort of blend of textures, aromas, the right amount of salt, sweet, the balance of flavors, and so on. So for sure, if you do it long enough, you are going to get reasonably good. But again, to be a Michelin star chef or someone who's a legendary kind of a cook and so on, probably. So that's where the art comes in. So I think what we often miss is that we call the whole thing art. It's not. It's just the art is built on an edifice of craft. And every musician here, as all of you are artists, you will all know that you don't get to be an artist without putting the back-breaking labor of mastering the craft first, right? It's got to come to you. You got to be able to hit the scales. You got to be able to make sure that you're not missing a note and missing a beat, and doing all the basics without even thinking, right? It has to kind of get into your, what Daniel Kahneman calls, system one thinking, which is that it just comes to you automatically. Once that happens, you can then focus on the art part, right? You look at a Picasso painting, right? And you think,
Right.
the average person will say, does this guy know how to draw? It just all looks odd. But look at his early paintings. They are absolutely photorealistic, amazing paintings.
Mhm.
Uh, and yet it is all of that craft then allows him to deconstruct that and break it apart and tell a different story, a far more moving story, in far more creative ways, and so on. So in that sense, I think it is a home cooking for me is just mostly back-breaking labor and craft, right? Uh, Restaurant owner, high-end fine dining, there may be an art involved and all that. It's
Mhm.
fine. But at home, it's just labor. It's just, and again, everyone who's cooked knows that most of the work is in prepping and cleaning. It's not the cooking,
Right.
right? And what's the art in prepping and cleaning, right? I mean, so it is just that I think, at home, it's very easy to say, oh, she was an amazing cook. She had the taste. Sure, she had a fantastic nose, and she had, you know, 20, 30 years of just doing the same thing every single day without any choice in the matter.
Right. In fact, one of the questions I have noted here is on the topic of how prepping your food helps with scheduling and time management, but you touched upon that. I want to switch gears a bit here. We've spoken from the perspective of the chef or the cook. I want to talk a little bit about the perception of taste as a taster, as someone who eats the food. When
Yes.
my husband and I, every single time we go to a South Indian restaurant, me having grown up in North India, I'm more likely to order a paneer masala dosha, although I'm a Keralite. My husband, on the other hand, without second thoughts, straight away orders a Mysore masala dosha. So you talk about the perception of taste, you attribute it to the concentration of certain flavors. I believe you had an example of salt being 1 to 1.5% by weight. But I
Yes.
wanted to really talk about, if you could touch upon that, and also on a related note, the topic about nostalgia and flavor memories and how certain flavors trigger certain memories, and what is extremely palatable to some people may be extremely unpalatable or distasteful to people who have grown up in a different part of the world. How could you care to elaborate a bit on that?
Yeah. So flavor, human beings are unique because we're the only animal that cooks their food, right? I mean, no other animal cooks food. Uh, and the act of cooking food actually makes the food significantly easier to digest. As a result of which, human beings spend less percentage of our daily calories just digesting food than any other animal. right?
Mhm.
And it is actually the act of cooking that then allowed the body to evolve a huge brain. So we are actually human because we cook. Without the invention of fire and cooking, we would not have had the brain we do now, which made us far better than the chimpanzees and gorillas and the other cousins that we have. So cooking is that central to us being human. So because it happened very recently, like this is literally about 100 to 200,000 years ago, not older than that, right? Which in the larger scale of evolution, the age of the earth and the evolution of life is barely it's like, if it was the age of life was about 1 hour, human beings arrived like 12, 11:59, right?
Mhm.
With barely a minute left to go. Uh, and if you really look at it, we have not had evolutionarily time to evolve a separate part of the brain to deal with flavor. So we basically just reuse whatever we had. And because flavor is multidimensional, because we sense aromas, we sense taste on the tongue, we sense the textures with the nervous system, endings in the mouth, which is what chilies, for example, is a nervous system sensation. It's not a taste or an aroma. Then we hear sounds, the crunching sounds, which is what tells us that something is fresh. Papadam, that
Mhm.
contrast that you require along with something soft, right? The payasam and the papadam, right? All of these things together are what sort of flavor this thing is. And on top of that, you're forever comparing that with past memories of what you taste, because that's how you decide this is safe to eat, this is good to eat, this is familiar, right? And I think that kept us alive as hunter gatherers, because anything unfamiliar tasting was likely to be poisonous, and so on. So you just kind of crave for what you ate when you were young, as a way of keeping those people close to the tribe, if you will, right? Which is why I think all religions and castes and communities always use food rules, uh, very strict food rules, because the moment you have food rules, it's very hard for a person to leave the group or tribe, because it's very hard to change your food habits, right? The moment you
Right.
say, oh, Jain food, nothing underground, no meat, right? No non-halal food, no beef, no pork, any of these restrictions, the moment you have that, right? It's very hard for you to switch. Uh, and in India, it's quite interesting, right? People will sometimes not be able to tolerate different kinds of oils. They'll say mustard oil is too
Oh yeah.
smelly. North Indians will say coconut oil is unbearable. North Indians find jackfruit smell to be unbearable,
True.
and so so I think it's a so all of this is deeply tied to how our brains process flavor, which is via nostalgia, which is use the part of the brain that deals with memories to also store flavor memories, right? It's like a jugad reuse, right? So as a result of which, all opinions about, oh, I don't like this, it's not great, you can largely ignore, because when somebody says, I don't like this, they're not actually telling you something that is about the quality of the food. What
Right.
they're actually saying is, this is unfamiliar to me. That's all they're saying. People will say things like, oh, the pani puri in this place is not as good as Mumbai. No, the pani puri in this place is not as familiar as the pani puri in Mumbai that you're used to eating, right? So people will say, oh, in New Jersey, you get pani puri. It's not the same as India. Of course, it will not be the same as it is
Right.
in India, right? Because it's just physically not possible. The water is different. The flour is different. The oil that you use is different. All of that is actually, it's just a different pani puri. It's not a worse pani puri. And if you were a kid who just was born and brought up in the US and you like that pani puri, you're probably going to go to Bombay and get very disappointed,
Right.
because it will not taste like the New Jersey pani puri, the pani puri in Edison or any of these other places, right?
Right.
So therefore, I think fundamentally, so I grew up again as in my teenage years in North India. So in fact, my comfort food is not dosa idli. It is actually dal makhani and roti, and then when my college teammates took me to Old Delhi and have got me kebabs and all of that. So that's my comfort food, right? Rather
Right.
than, so it is just that, so it is all so subjective and individual,
Right.
that it's a way of not taking your food opinions or anybody else's food opinions very seriously.
Right. And now I know not to be offended when someone criticizes my dish. Thank you,
Yes,
Ashok.
absolutely. Yes.
And I have a question. My next question is on the similar line, but it has more to do with genetic predisposition and the geography of, the distribution of such populations. I believe it was in one of your videos on Instagram where you spoke about why there are more non-vegetarians in the southern part of India and East India as opposed to West and North. And it was probably another video that I saw that lactose intolerance is more common in South India and East India, and not so
Yes.
common in the West
Yeah.
and the North. Is there a
Yeah.
correlation between the two? Or
Yeah, they're very connected. In fact, actually, So it's like this. So first is geography, right? Is that so think about the practicality of agriculture in general. In general, agriculture is hard, right? And plant-based agriculture, growing grains, is the easiest of as hard as agriculture is. Amongst that, it is generally like you can grow a large amount, it can feed a large population, and so on, right? But you need rivers, you need river plains, you need flat land, you need arable land, and so on, right? So that's number one. So in general, what also happens is that hunter-gatherers, there's a very interesting thing. When we switched from being hunter-gatherers to people who did agriculture, the first thing that happened, we became shorter. So skeletons of hunter-gatherers are much taller than the skeletons of people who are Sumerians in Indus Valley and all of them. Because you have to remember that agricultural eating grains and eating this sort of food is the most unhealthy food you can imagine in comparison to the diversity of animal protein and also the feasting and fasting cycle that a hunter-gatherer would go through, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they would hunt a deer, eat it, and then not eat for a week. Both of which is good, right? One, you're mostly eating protein, and then you are having long periods of fasting, which is also good for you. They never had tooth decay because they didn't eat much carbs. Also did not have calcium deficiencies, iron deficiencies. They did not have anemia. And more importantly, they also kind of did not have all of the other diabetes and heart disease sort of things and so on, right? So therefore, in a sense, we as people are still adapting to a culture where we eat so much carbohydrates. Okay? It's so abundant and so on. So therefore, what we ended up doing is to domesticate animals so that can eat the agricultural waste that we grow. And so that way you get animal protein, right? Now, rearing animals, as you might imagine, is hard because you only get 1/10 of the calories as you do from plants, because sunlight 10% is converted to plants. Animals eat the plants, you only get 10% of that energy. So net, it is actually more inefficient from a overall sustainability standpoint to eat animal protein. In that context, dairy was groundbreaking because you could get high quality animal protein without the death of the animal, right? And so in that sense, but the only problem is you needed huge amounts of flat, big pasture land. We're speaking historically, right? We're not speaking about the modern days, right? And this kind of large pasture land existed in North and West India. Once you get to the Deccan Plateau and south, land is highly uneven. You don't get large pasture land, except, pretty much the thin strip of the coast. You really don't have that. And so in general, only the North and West could support a dairy-based culture. So which is what is interesting, right? The Indian vegetarianism is weird because it includes dairy. The vegans don't consider milk to be, vegan, right?
Right.
But for purely cultural reasons, the North and West, which is where in a sense, the epicenter of the political, culture of India is set there, they have decided that milk is vegetarian, but eggs are not. Eggs are very similar in that sense. They don't involve the death of the animal because it's unfertilized egg. In fact, it is actually more ethically moral, if you will, back in the day at least, because you have to keep a cow pregnant 6 times to keep getting milk, right? You have to prevent a hen from getting pregnant to get eggs, right? So you ask all women here which sort of life do they think they might prefer, and you'd realize that eggs are actually a perfectly fine vegetarian source of protein. But no, because eggs and poultry actually from the south and the east, because they're more suitable for poultry cultivation, which is the hen, the modern day fowl was actually domesticated in Bengal, somewhere in Bihar, Bengal, and then it sort of spread around the south and east, including China as well. So therefore, what you find is that places that support dairy are then in turn able to give rise to religions and systems of belief that are founded on vegetarianism and ahimsa and things like that. They did not originate in the south and east. So they could not have, because no religion that made people starve will survive, right? So it has to first support the fact that you can actually eat. And you can do that only in that sense. So what you find in India is that almost all vegetarians live in the north and west. The south and eastern states typically, if you take each of the states, they will have less than 5% vegetarian population. Right? Some states like Kerala, Tamil Nadu, Telangana, etc., are 98%, almost 97, 98% seafood or
Right.
meat eating in general, right? And so the second thing is, again, as a result of this, that because of the nature of the population that originally settled in North and West India almost 4,000 to 5,000 years ago, who brought with them a genetic mutation that gave them the ability to digest lactose as adults. You also end up having people like a Haryanvi grandfather who can drink 2 liters of milk a day. And there's just no way an older person, South and East. So typically we tend to drink like yogurt, things that have less lactose, right? Or other forms of dairy which are, low lactose. But yeah, so this is basically, they're both intrinsically connected, the vegetarian, non-vegetarian line, as well as the lactose tolerance in India.
Fascinating. I think, Ashok, with the kind of scientific, historic, evolutionary perspective you bring, it only helps us appreciate things objectively. And there's really no need for anyone to be political about it, right?
It is. So food is, unfortunately, food is political. It is because, as I said, no, I think food is central to sustaining identities. Which is why I think all religions and castes take it very seriously if you break that rule of eating food that you're not supposed to eat, right? And I think, so whether be it a vegetarian person eating meat outside the house for the first time, or any of those kinds of things, it does kind of get political. And I think I guess there has always been a tendency in India, at least independent India, since 1947, to be honest, of repeatedly trying and failing to homogenize the country, right? One language, one national food, one national. It doesn't work. Every 100 kilometers, we have a different language, different cultures, different eating habits, different worship habits. In that, right? So it is. So many of the food, taboos and all the violence that you see related to food in the North, the people in the South and East would be very surprised that why is this a problem?
Right.
Right. And it is. So it is. Therefore, I think it is a. But India is a very diverse country, and the history of every part of India is a product of colonialism, a product of thousands of years of in some cases invasions, in some cases trade, right? In some cases colonialism, in some cases a mix of everything. So yeah, so I think we should be celebrating that diversity rather than trying to impose one idea of what it is on others.
Right. Fascinating. Krish, we could go on this topic, but I want to switch gears again, and I'm going to put out some very blatant statements to represent misconceptions for you to clear. I'm going to club a couple of questions together in the interest of time before I hand it over to my co-host, Shri.
Sure.
First up, on the topic of nutrition, microwaving food destroys nutrients, reheating food is not good for your health, frozen fruits and vegetables are less nutritious than fresh fruits and vegetables.
No. So this is absolutely not true, right? Because so the first and foremost, for one, NRIs believe this a lot less than Indians in India, by the way. So that by itself should tell you whether it's true or not, right? So if the fridge did not exist, NRIs would just give up and come back. And for the most part, so I think, a couple of important things. All cooking or all heating essentially is going to destroy some nutrients in food. See, this is not a binary, right? So technically speaking, the act of making a chapati, cooking a dal, is going to reduce the micronutrients in those by 25%, okay? But you can't actually digest the raw thing anyway. So it's completely meaningless for you to think that way, right? So therefore, I think it is, you do have to cook them to even digest and absorb them, right? So this 25% loss is meaningless because you're going to get 0% if you actually try and eat the raw dal, right? So therefore, all heating and cooking will destroy some micronutrients, which is why we don't eat one thing. We eat 5, 6 different things so that we collectively make sure that we get all the vitamins and macros, right? So therefore, and the other thing is that the fridge does not cause any loss of nutrients. unless you keep it for like 2-3 weeks, in which case oxidation might result in some loss. But other than that, nothing is actually lost in the fridge. Reheating, again, as I said, every time you heat, you are going to lose some amount. But then again, you only lose water-soluble vitamins. That's all, right? Vitamin B and C. You can add vitamin C by just squeezing lime, and vitamin B, simply just have a side salad along with your leftover food, or eat some fruits. You'll be fine, right? I think people tend to completely overthink this. You are far better off eating leftovers than ordering some fresh food from a restaurant, which is 4 times, 3 times more calories, more oil, more sodium, and all of that. And so therefore, I think, uh, people ignore the value of convenience in being healthy. If it's not convenient and sustainable, you cannot possibly be healthy at all, right? So
Right.
because it's impractical diet, you have to make everything from scratch, then you'll stop doing it after a week. And
Very
so
true.
therefore, yeah, so none of this is actually true. So these are actually, and of all reheating methods, microwave results in the least loss of micronutrients
That is very
compared to
reassuring.
boiling and steaming and all of that. So absolutely, please, use the fridge, use the freezer, and microwave.
Absolutely. Thank you, Ashok. The next topic on my list of myths here is organic food is better than non-organic food, and veganism is good for you and good for the planet.
So the first one is again, as I said, I think the benefits you get from simply eating more vegetables far outweigh the difference in switching from regular to organic. So this is what people have to remember, right? So if you're eating like this much vegetables, right, and you switch to this much of organic vegetables, you maybe get a small improvement in the amount of, some of these polyphenols and some of these other antioxidants and vitamins and so on, right? But let's say you take this much vegetables, you take the regular cheap vegetables, just increase it and eat twice as much. The benefits are 100 times more. So I think it is about, I think, as a general rule, the more you pay, rich people like to think that somehow the extra they're paying is going to get them the same equivalent of advantages. No, the benefits actually diminish. So at some point you're paying for vanity, right? And so therefore, it is, but you want to convince yourself that, oh, this is really, really much better and so on. So if you're really, really rich enough, yeah, by all means, switch to organic. But the difference is very, very nominal and tiny. The benefits of simply eating more vegetables is just far, far more. So that's number one, right? See, veganism is always a tricky thing. And again, often, at least on social media, every time I say anything about veganism, there's an army of activists who are there to fiercely defend it and so on. But again, I think my point is just merely about practicality. Okay? If you live in a first world, if you live in the US, I think it's absolutely possible, especially if you're privileged, it's possible to be vegan and be perfectly healthy. I think it's great, right? You get high quality plant-based proteins, you get high quality supplements, you can get B12 supplements and stuff, and you can live completely plant-based, etc., etc. Yeah, and fair to say that I think your carbon footprint compared to anyone who's eating dairy or eggs or meat is going to be lower. There's no doubt about it if you're living in the West. Now, the situation in India is a lot more trickier. The situation in India is that half the population doesn't get enough food. Okay?
Right.
And our per capita consumption of protein is already very low, right? And we are in situations where many of the North and Western states, for religious reasons, don't give eggs in midday meals to schools for, the religious reasons and so on,
Yeah.
right? And you can sort of see the stunting and all of the other problems because those kids are not getting enough protein, right?
Right.
And the other thing is that 60% of agricultural land in the US, absolutely understand, is atrocious. And I can see what the vegans are sort of fighting against. It's saying that the sheer impact on the planet, right, is crazy. In India, that's not true. It's less than 6 or 7% of overall agricultural land is used because India, we've always done mixed use. So what we do is that we grow rice, we take the rice, all the rest is fed to the cattle. See, in India, we don't feed soybean to cattle, which is what they do in the US, right? So, in India, we feed actual waste, right? So that's why the cows and goats in India are all very small size. They're not the, giant bus-sized things for for profit reasons. So I think what a lot of vegans don't understand is that the Indian agricultural ecosystem is entirely different. Animal husbandry here is 100 times more sustainable and practically part of the circular economy, right? If you're a poor farmer living in a shack with an agricultural laborer, you're going to have a couple of chickens running around the house and have a goat or two.
Right.
It's been a circular economy for thousands of years where you have agriculture, you don't have to feed the chicken. It will literally eat all the waste around and insects and so on. And you get free protein, right? For your small family, right?
Right.
And the goat doesn't eat, you don't need to give food to the goat. It's simply going to just eat wherever, travel around the village, eat whatever it is. And also it is just that I think it is this circle economy that's largely, as India urbanizes, for sure, per capita meat consumption is going up and we do have to pay attention. But I think, in my opinion, it should never be this puritanical sense of no animal-based protein. It's not sustainable for the rest of the planet to get high quality protein from plants and get vitamin B12 supplements and omega-3 and all the rest of that stuff, when in reality they could just get it from fish and all these other things, while absolutely pushing at least the rich people to consume less meat as much as possible. Maybe, switch to plant-based alternatives when you can, right?
Right.
When you can afford it, right? And so I think in a sense, I think I always find that food, you cannot have these hard binaries.
Right.
It's always good. So a person who eats meat 5 times a week, switching to 3 times a week should be a win for the planet, right? I mean, insisting that no, that person must eat kale and broccoli and some processed plant-based protein and take vitamin B12 supplements is idiotic, right? And especially if you come from a culinary culture where it is traditional and so on, how are you going to insist that you're suddenly going to eat some stuff that is completely tastes unnatural to you?
Very true.
It's going to be a journey, right?
Yeah.
And yeah, so that I think is the point I'd make.
And I think a lot of the times concepts from the West are applied to the Indian parlance and which may not necessarily apply. And I remember you mentioning in one of your videos, a hipster or an artisan in South Bombay can afford to be on a vegan diet because he can take those supplements.
Yeah,
But
absolutely.
that's not
Yes.
necessarily true for your average guy
Yes.
on the street. Okay, in the interest of time, I'll
Yes.
just hand it
And
over
I'll
to...
make a very needlessly controversial. Yeah. I'll make a controversial sort of this thing, right? 3/4 of vegan influencers I see on Instagram, they look like they need protein. They visibly look unhealthy to me, right? I may be wrong. I mean, maybe they are absolutely healthy. Maybe looking that thin is perfectly fine. But I don't know. I mean, they look like they don't have muscle mass at all. And so clearly, if people who are this wealthy are still somehow not able to get enough protein. Now, the point is that Virat Kohli, remember, is a vegan. There are many top athletes in the world who are vegan. But Virat Kohli is a billionaire with 12 chefs and 12 nutritionists and the top guys in the world making sure that he's eating what he needs to eat to perform at the level he does, right? Even the South Bombay hipster may not be having that level of access to stay that healthy and so on. So as I said, I think eat what works for you, right?
All right. My co-host Sri has been prompting me to switch gears for a while now. I'll hand it over to him.
Yeah, no, in the interest of time, we will open up
Sure.
for the questions. Before that, I have a couple of questions. So, one, social media is a great source for misinformation these days, right? Now, you really get really fresh misinformation, which are really what's that stale from 90s, right? So, as a content creator, my question is: do you follow anyone, for health and nutrition kind of information? Or what should one take from social media and what should one leave in social media?
I think in general, if you really ask me, get recipes from social media. Please do not get your health advice from social media. I think would be my advice. And this includes me as well. I exist because there is 2,000 times more misinformation. Therefore, I exist. I seem to be popular because I'm providing a debunking or something like that, right? But in an ideal world, I should not have to essentially explain things from high school biology, literally. Some of the nonsense I end up debunking does not require a PhD, does not require some advanced biology degree at all. I
Yeah.
literally quote my class 8 biology textbook for why you're wrong, right? So that is how bad it is. So you have to remember that social media exists. The algorithms tend to amplify sensationalism and negativity because that gets engagement. People tend to engage with negative content. So if I make a video that says that, oh, microwave is perfectly fine, nobody will care. But microwave will cause cancer, will get everyone's attention. The algorithms will show it to everyone. All of a sudden, a bunch of people will click like on it. And then, it just becomes a thing of its own. And then some uncles will forward on WhatsApp saying that, see, I told you, you must not, I want all my food fresh. All great Indian kitchen uncles will also start. So the problem is that this entire ecosystem is designed for spreading misinformation. It's not designed for spreading information. So I would actually say, don't get your health advice from there. As Michael Pollan says, I think it's reasonably straightforward. I mean, as much as possible, as much as is practical, because you still need to live a life, you still need to go out with friends, you still need to eat, pizzas and other things once in a while. As much as possible, try and eat what your grandmother ate. Because one, genetically, it's going to work for you. Your body is going to be well tuned to accept it from a gut bacteria standpoint and so on. And the other thing is that eat a diversity of things, right? It's not just, one thing and so on. Don't worry about, right? Eat food, meaning that eat as few things that come out of packets. So food, as Michael Pollan says, shouldn't come out of a packet. It should come from a plant or an animal, right? So that's food, right? As much as possible. But again, it may not be practical. You're going out on a hike, you're going to take a protein bar, you're going to, once in a while you're hungry, you'll eat a Snickers, and that's fine, right? But as much as possible, eat food. Mostly plants, again, is good because plants are nutrient dense. So even if you are eating chicken, beef, pork, etc., more the side dish of vegetables is associated with great health outcomes, right? And I say plants in that context are not necessarily like grains like white rice or maida or things like that, but really, the vegetables and so on. Eat as much the plants, mostly plants, and not too much. This is the most important thing, right? Meaning that if you are eating at replacement or below levels in terms of calories for your height, weight, gender, etc., you are doing the best you can. All the rest is genetics. That's it.
Yeah.
That's all you can do, right? So, and that in a sense seems to be, so here's the interesting, there are people who can go on a caloric deficit by eating just chocolate bars and things like that, and eat, occasional fiber and, milkshake and juices. And they do lose weight as well.
Okay.
But the question is, may not be sustainable. You may have other risks and so on. But the point is that the value of eating less is hugely massive compared to all the time waste about organic, inorganic, seed oil, non-seed oil, olive oil. All that is nonsense. Again, so less fat is better than choice of fat.
Okay.
So yeah, so I think it is just all about, really speaking, you don't need to follow any social media health influencer at all.
Yeah, I can't agree more on that. One criticism I saw on social media is that you're using science to kind of criticize religion, faith, Ayurveda, and all, right? What do you have to say to those critics?
See, as a general, I don't respond to individuals. I generally respond to ideas. So in the sense that, see, a person who may be an Ayurvedic doctor, right, might be doing several good things. He may be helping a lot of patients. He may be, very, very impactful and all that. But if he's making social media content where he says that, like, for example, just today morning, I saw one Ayurvedic doctor say that the paneer is poison for your blood.
Oh, wow.
I think, to be, the moment I see that, and he has so many followers, it's like, boss, India, vegetarians, that is pretty much the one source of animal protein they have.
Absolutely.
And if somebody watches that video and then reduces their paneer consumption, the impact on their health is much worse because Indians are chronically low on protein consumption. Okay. Vegetarians even worse so, right?
Yeah.
And calcium for women much low. So you're stopping that one source that they have. And so I'm absolutely going to debunk you, right? So in that sense, the second thing is that I debunk people who use the word Ayurveda. I'm not debunking Ayurveda. I am not convinced that any of these internet influencers somehow are Ayurvedic experts. I don't think they've read those textbooks. I don't think they genuinely understand that this is a holistic system of medical and food and natural wellness wisdom that existed locally in several parts of India on the basis of local tribal herbal remedies and so on. The idea of what that wisdom is in Kerala near Trivandrum is very different from the herbs and things that grow in the foothills of the Himalayas. So for starters, I don't think there was one Ayurveda. It's series of local traditional wisdoms that have all been over time compiled locally, etc., etc. A random 90-second internet influencer saying nonsense and then saying it is Ayurveda, it is patently silly. And then I'll point out a lot of inconsistencies. So because people cherry pick, right? One of the single most commonly used cures in Ayurveda for many illnesses is deer meat.
Oh, okay.
I would love to see which Ayurvedic doctor from North India is now recommending deer meat as a cure, right? Because it's all very, very cherry picked stuff, right? Garlic is such a powerful medicine, and yet the very same people will say garlic is tamasic. So it is just that I think, so people have to understand that I am not questioning your past. I'm questioning your understanding of the past.
Okay.
Because I think you are distorting the past by oversimplifying what was essentially a local, highly effective bit of wisdom, combining it into one large, giant, artificial single thing and saying it all applies. This is one wisdom that applies to all of India. I said, was genetically and food-wise and everything, people in every 2 states are very different. Right? How can there be one system that applies to everyone?
Yeah. I think I have like a lot of questions. So, but in the interest of time, we will ask the audience to unmute and then ask your questions.
Sure.
One more thing.
I'm okay to spend 10 minutes extra if you guys are okay. Yeah.
Oh, cool. Yeah. That would be great. It's
Sure.
going really interesting, and there are a lot of comments in the chat section who are appreciating the thoughts that you are sharing. So, if you could stay back for a few
Sure.
moments,
I'm good.
that'd
Yes.
be great.
Sure.
Thank you. Yeah. Would you guys mind unmuting yourself and shoot your questions, please?
I think Harish Krishnamurthy is there. Yeah.
Yeah. Harish?
I think Krishnan Gutti. Yes. Sorry.
Yeah. Hello, Ashok. Thank you for that awesome talk. So I just had a very simple question, and pardon me if you already covered this in your book. I'm still digesting the early chapters. So the question is there anything functional about the garnishing that we do a lot in our Indian cooking? And the reason I also ask this is because my kids absolutely hate it, and they think that I spoil every dish by adding all that kadagu and onion and chili. So just wanted to find a good reason to convince them.
Oh, okay. So I think, for starters, I don't think you'll ever convince kids to eat garnishes, karivepalai and kottamalli and all of that. It's never going to happen. Kids anywhere, including the US, including India. So let's just say this, kids have terrible taste, and it's by design, right? So they mature in their taste only well into their late teens. And so therefore, it is not surprising that they don't like anything that is odd tasting, pungent. They only like sweet and squishy and certain kind of starchy textures, and that's just it, right? In fact, as they say, I think societies that give a lot of importance to kids generally have very poor cuisine. And as you can see from American and British food and so on, right? So in general, I think, so for starters, I think the tadka kind of talipu kind of garnish, which is mustard and, and all of that, they are aimed at adding aroma. So highlighting the base aroma of the dish, what you start at the end, you sort of end with it. So that's really the element here. The herb garnishes like coriander, those etc. Those are actually generally packed with sort of see because the act of cooking is going to reduce a lot of the micronutrients, like the vitamins and so on, right? And so having some fresh garnishes on top, which is where people like slice, North India, they like have onions on the side, right? And adding kottamalli on top and all of that, and lime and all of that is a way of adding many of those lost vitamins at the end, right? So it's just basically, I think you can make the argument that it is healthy. I don't know when was the last time saying healthy worked on kids, but yeah, you can still try that.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, there's a question from Vinod Narayan. He's asking, do our tastes change as we grow older? Some meats seem less tasty for him. So are any thoughts on meat substitutes in the future?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. As you grow older, your the number of taste buds in your number of functioning taste buds goes down. The number of functioning nasal receptors go down. So you do lose your sense of taste and smell as you age, just like you lose your hearing. So absolutely. In fact, from 30 onwards, you actually lose it. So it is for some people lose it very quickly. Some people, it might be a little bit more gradual. Men lose it far quicker than women because women have more taste buds and more nasal receptors to begin with. So women smell better and taste better. So there's something called a super taster test, which is that if you have a certain density of taste buds and more, you're considered a super taster. So usually most chefs tend to be super tasters. But more than 70% of super tasters are women. And so they tend to be super sensitive to very bitter tastes and very strong and pungent tastes and so on. So the super tasters also often do not like very spicy food, like a lot of chilies and so on. So losing this sense of, so in fact, actually what happens is that as you age, you will find less and less taste in your food. So people will compensate by adding more salt and adding more spices and adding more oil, which is actually bad for you, bad for your heart. And so on. So I think, it's an unfortunate thing, but yes. So it's just natural for you to lose your sense of taste with age.
Okay. Yeah, a request to the participants, if you don't mind unmuting yourself and asking the questions, because as more and more questions come here right now, I might miss out on a few.
So one last thing, I think he did specifically ask about chicken. I'll just answer that.
Yeah,
right?
Chicken. Yeah, sorry.
It is also possible that I think the taste of a chicken is entirely down to the diet of the chicken and how much exercise it gets. And so if you kind of maybe grow up eating the country chicken, natukori type of thing, it is definitely would have been much tastier, more flavorful than the bird that's basically caged and does not move all its life and so on. So yeah, so that degree there can be a difference, but otherwise no. Yeah.
Thanks, thanks Ashok. Thanks for answering. I've listened to you on your podcast with Amit Verma. And I just wanted to appreciate Kirti here, because what you spoke over here was entirely different from what you spoke there. And that's really good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bobby, you want to go next?
Yeah. My question, hello, Krish. Thanks for joining us today. And my question is more about is there any social engineering happening in the contemporary India to change the food habits of people in the last 10 years or so? My question is not very specific to the anti-beef propaganda, but is there anything else happening with extreme right-wing at the helm of India's ruling? And is there anything happening at a social level where people change their food habits due to that? Or is there any social engineering happening like that? That's the first part of the question. The second part of the question is, what is the real story or history behind this? The Brahmins used to eat meat earlier, and it was due to the Buddhism that Brahmins stopped eating meat and became vegetarians. So is there anything true about that?
Yeah, no. So the first part of the question, absolutely, I think there has been a tendency in the last 10 years to try and create a sort of a one nation, one country, one language, one way, etc. But I would say it's probably kind of, given the size and complexity of India, let me just say that I honestly don't think it has had much of a difference. I do not see any change in eating habits in the South and East, for example. For sure, I'm absolutely certain that if you're in the North and West, there's a good chance that if you're perhaps a butcher or someone, you now have to be a little bit more wary of how you go about. You don't know when the police will harass you, and those kinds of issues in UP and those kinds of places for sure. But at a broader level, I think the farther you get away from that kind of the cow belt, if you will. I think it is the impact. I don't think has been much. If anything, I think the data from the last 10 years show increasing per capita meat consumption every single year. So so in that sense, I think simply because India is getting wealthier, as soon as people get wealthy, the part of the population that just comes out of poverty, the first thing they do is consume more meat. It just goes without saying. No politics is going to change that, right? And it's just the way it is, right? Is there maybe a section of the ultra rich that are maybe changing their eating habits? Hard to say, because they're very few number as compared to the rest of the Indian population, if you will. For sure, I think the fact that vegetarians probably disproportionately are overrepresented in the richest, 100 billion people in India, right? And so I would actually say some of the things one would have expected to have changed, attitudes towards, pure veg versus, this idea that we should not share the, same vessel and you cannot use the same. So it's quite interesting, right? So, you can get vegetarian, vegan food in the US. There is very rarely any argument that you have to use separate vessels and separate all of that at all, right? But but in India, it is very much related to that sort of caste idea of purity of being a vegetarian and so on. That I think I would argue has not changed as fast as one would have liked with economic growth. Even right till now, very recently, with the whole Zomato announcing this very silly idea of having a pure veg fleet of scooters delivering only vegetarian food, so that veg and non-veg food don't share the same delivery box, and so on. Got a lot of flack from people around, and then they eventually changed their idea and so on. But yeah, I think it will still sort of takes a little bit more time before we kind of change that. That said, I think the history of vegetarianism as a very central thing is a very far more complicated. There's and I had a chat with Devdutt Patnaik, who's a good friend, and in fact, I yet to post that section of that interview. What he said is actually quite fascinating in that I think these ideas of ahimsa and ideas of vegetarianism kind of arise around the time of what was historically called a very excessively wasteful culture of animal sacrifices amongst the traditional sort of Vedic rituals. Now, the thing is that I think, most people who rage on social media often never read the Vedas. And but I grew up, studying Sanskrit and so on. So the Vedas are filled with animal sacrifices. Right? So in fact, the Yajurveda is basically just a list of instructions for how to do animal sacrifices for specific verses of the Rig Veda and so on. So it is, and when I say animal sacrifices, it is absolutely cattle as well. It's all animals. There is no this thing there at all. So clearly, I think everybody was consuming, including the priestly community, was consuming meat at some point of time. But Mahavira and Buddha represented a antithesis to that, and they were like, I think this excessiveness has to give way to simplicity. It has to give way to that overly ritualistic thing has to give way to a very more of a non-consumerist. So Jainism and Buddhism are very non-consumerist as philosophies, right? They're rooted in this idea that you must not, consume and so on. In fact, Jainism is very extreme in that it is considered a value for you to starve to death, when you reach, a certain age and so on. The Chandragupta Maurya is said to have starved to death, which is where the Bahubali statue in Sravanabelagola in Karnataka is basically a place where Chandragupta Maurya is said to have starved to death. So in that sense, the problem is because we don't have written records. It is only purported that between that period of time, at 1,000 years around that time, by the time you got to Adi Shankara, the Shaivite movement and the Vaishnavite movement in the 10th and 11th century with Ramanuja and so on, by that time, I think these integrating this reform, the Advaita sort of thing, which sought to simplify Hinduism for people, right? Saying that, no, let's not do all of those heavy duty animal sacrifices. They rebranded Ashwamedha Yajna as no, there is no letting a horse loose and then slaughtering it and killing it. It's actually the white horse represents your ego, right? You should let the ego run wild and then slaughter the ego. All of these were, in a sense, creative. The beauty of Sanskrit is that you can interpret it any which way you want. The metaphors work any which way. So Adi Shankara did this phenomenal, and it's amazing that entire thing started out in the south. So Adi Shankara is from Kaladi, which is from Kerala, right? And he, in a sense, he and then eventually Ramanujacharya sort of made around that time. By that time, it's pretty clear that I think the priestly community was expected to be vegetarian. So a lot of the animal sacrificial homums all now have symbolic things. So a bull used to be sacrificed, but now there's a brass pot with a coconut and mango leaves, which is a stand-in for the bull that you know much earlier. Okay, so therefore I think while it's really hard to say, but you can only sort of go by when these references kind of stop coming in terms of public consumption of some of these things, and some of the commentary that came much later. The later commentaries on the Rig Veda are like, oh, it is not good to eat meat and so on. Oh, you must not kill the cow. All come much later. So I think that's the beauty and the complexity of India is that you can find justification for anything you want to do, depending on what slice of window, what slice of history you want to look at, right? So, but yeah, I think the whole right now, yeah, the fact is that at least for the better part of the last 1500 years, the priestly elite in society have been vegetarians, lacto-vegetarians, if you will, but not eggs. Because again, which is interesting, because I think this brand of Brahminical Hinduism did not originate in the south; it originated in the north. So the Nambudris essentially are people who came from the north and settled in Kerala. The Iyers are people who came from Maharashtra and settled in Tamil Nadu, if you will, right? So those ideas around, oh, eggs are not vegetarian, milk is very precious, ghee is holy, all of that is very much from there. So yeah, which is interesting because the Tamil word "nei" refers to animal fat. So you go to a villager, and in his mind, a small rural villager in Madurai, "nei" refers to the fat under the skin of an animal. The mutton fat or the chicken fat is what he calls "nei." But yeah.
Thank you for that. And I think there is a question from Reena. She asked, in contemporary Western culture, the Mediterranean diet is increasingly regarded as superior. What are your thoughts on that shift?
I think you can be healthy or unhealthy on a wide range of diets.
Mm-hmm.
I would actually argue you can be healthy on an American diet too. It's just a question of your balance and what you eat and how you eat and when you eat, how much you eat, right?
Yeah.
But where I think the Mediterranean diet kind of plays a role is that food is not just that. Food is also culture.
Absolutely.
So Mediterranean diet comes with a Mediterranean culture of sitting together with your family and eating it slowly and eating food in a specific sequence. The salad first, a lot of vegetables, a lot of high quality seafood, right? And it is really, it's that sort of slow life and so on, right? So because the weirdly interesting thing about all these 100-year-old people who live in Sicily and Sardinia, regularly say Japanese and Italians live so long, so in some places, right? Almost all people who are 120 lived up to 120 years, almost all of them were smokers. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So you could actually technically make the argument that, oh, okay, so you have to smoke to live up to 120 years. Actually, the fact of the matter is that all the rest of the things they did in their life was so good that even smoking didn't, add much risk, right? So that's the interesting point there. Right? So I would actually say it's about a whole heap of things. Your culture of cooking, your culture of eating, Are you eating together? We do know that eating alone is associated with far worse eating health outcomes than eating together with people. And eating with your family and so on, right? There have been many studies done on that and so on. So I would say, so therefore, I think it's sometimes you can get obsessed with one diet and so on. But yeah, your Mediterranean diet transplanted to New Jersey, where you're like eating a pita sandwich from a Greek restaurant with deep fried and saturated fat, would not really work.
Yeah.
Right. But if you're breathing the clean mountainous air of Sicily and living a slow life with a very active social life and great amounts of nature and physical activity, and you're enjoying with friends and family every day for years and eating that diet, yeah, then yes, then for sure it's going to have a great. So I would say don't. All this is clickbait. If you focus on all those things and eat your Indian food, you'll be fine. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, now there is a question on turmeric. In fact, I also had that question. So, what are your thoughts on superfoods and then this cleansing cocktails that you hear about, everywhere? Right? What is your take on that?
It's complete bullshit. There is no such thing as a superfood. There are no super villains and superfoods. Okay, one ingredient cannot do anything to your body. You don't eat ingredients. You eat food together. Right, your body then absorbs nutrients. Okay, and Dr. Abby Phillips, liver doctor, has also sort of really said this many times, that 500 grams of turmeric has 1 gram of curcumin, which is the magical superfood and so on. For you to get in, how much turmeric are you adding to your food? You're eating one half teaspoon, right? You're getting almost a homeopathic level of tiny amount of curcumin that is not going to help you at all. And if you artificially drink a lot of turmeric, that's actually bad for your liver. It'll thin your blood also. So I think it is, so stop believing in superfoods. There are no bad ingredients or good ingredients. There are bad meals and bad diets. That's what you have to think about. Yeah.
Yeah. And, there is a question on MSG. I have also had a question. So are there really hero foods and villain foods? People say Maida or MSG is a victim of this such campaign, right? What do you have to say on that?
Yeah, so MSG clearly was. It was just American racism against the Chinese. The Chinese, Japanese, and Korean people consume so much MSG. If it harmed them, clearly there's been no evidence because they live much longer than Americans do. So I don't think we should be worried about the tiny amount of MSG. See, Maida again, I think it's like this. If your diet is entirely Maida and not enough vegetables, not enough protein, not enough of other things, right? For sure, it's going to spike your blood sugar and it's bad for you, right? Which is why, people will do stupid things like Malabar parota. They will say, I will eat atta parota, not Malabar parota.
Yeah.
That's not the point. You should be focusing on eating one parota instead of two, rather than switch to that difference between atta and maida, not much. Okay. But it is about how much you eat and what else you eat with it.
So I have two more questions and then probably we can wind up. Now, one, I cannot leave you without asking anything about music. So when it comes to music, right, are you a purist and traditionalist, or are you okay to mix flavors? And especially in the context of whole Madras Music Academy controversy that's happening, right? What are your thoughts on that?
I should be the wrong person to ask, because my music would be, even TM Krishna will find very disturbing.
Yeah,
because,
I heard that.
Yeah. So because I've been doing like Sanskrit heavy metal with Carnatic and all of that. So I have in fact I think one of my most viral things was to sing the menu of an Italian restaurant, all the fettuccine, capellini, all of that sounded like Aikiri Nandini. So in that sense, I think, I've always been an iconoclast in that sense. So see, for me, I think, in my opinion, classical music is not classical because it has some class.
Oh, okay.
Right? because the music has some intrinsic amazing class or something. No. Classical music is classical because of the class of people who have decided that, no, this is my music, this is my elite music. I will have membership criteria. I will have my own academy and sabha, and only these people are allowed to listen to it and really, praise it. And these are the rules, right? It's basically, you cannot have classical music without having elites in society. That's just how it works. Okay.
Yeah.
A group of elites have decided that this is what is classical music, and that's all there is to it, right? I would actually argue the greater service to music, including the idea of ragas and melodies and all, have been done by film directors, have been done by people who perform film music, Ilayaraja or Rahman or Vidyasagar or anyone else, right? So therefore, so this entire controversy, in my opinion, is completely silly, right? I think it's okay for anyone to disagree with T.M. Krishna's politics, and we all have an individual right in our democracy to do that, right? But this is one award for 1 year for musical contributions, and if anyone is arguing that T.M. Krishna has not contributed to Carnatic music, has got to be, I don't know, blind and deaf, right? Absolutely. Because he has, I mean, I've been listening to his music since when he was like 19 years old, right? He's been singing forever, right? And and his body of work is immense, right? So of course you can disagree with what he may have done in the last few years. That's fine, but you don't take away what he has done since the age of 19 till the age of 45, right? Right. So in that sense, as a lifetime achievement, it is for music. And again, he has used Carnatic music to argue against pollution of the Ennore Creek. He has used Carnatic music to argue against pollution in Kodaikanal. He has used Carnatic music to bring to light people who clean night soil and the manual scavenging. Right. And if you're saying you have a problem with that, then it's not a commentary on your music, it's a commentary on your politics.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you're welcome to have it. But then why deny the fact that he has the right to win an award, right? So anyway, I think, every once in a while does need iconoclasts. And he isn't the first one, right? There were musicians in the 1960s who were doing new things that the establishment did not like. Right? I mean, we all remember, I have heard a concert, I have a recording where Chebbai Vaidyanatha Bhagavatar, he's performing a concert on, sitting next to him is Yesudas. Right? And it is Yesudas's birthday. So he wishes Yesudas happy birthday and expresses a great disappointment that he is singing in film music. This is, by the way, in the 1970s, right? And then they proceed to sing, right? But today, if you Yesudas's contributions to overall music are just so much more, right? As a result of the fact that he was heard by more people. He had a larger audience. He democratized what would be Carnatic music, outside of just that hall where only some 100 tambrams are allowed to come, right? So I think in that sense, once in a while, he's not the first person to do this, right? And again, the T.M. Krishna's generation of musicians were also all the first generation of young Carnatic musicians who were happy to sing in films, which, by the way, T.M. Krishna avoided singing. So he was at one point of time very against film music and so on. But Unni Krishnan, he was hugely into, right? So many of the other Carnatic musicians were into singing in films, and that in a sense improved a public interest in all of this, right? So I think it is about. As I said, classical music has nothing to do with the class of the music. It has to do with the economic class of the people who want to own that kind of music. Sorry, at some point of time, something has to give.
Yeah, no, it cannot be explained in a better way, right? So for the, I'm sure it would be a question from all the fans out there. So what is going to be your next book on? And is any work in progress that you can share at the moment?
Yes, yeah, I mean, it is. Yes, I'm obviously running late and so on. I'm sure my publisher will
Yeah.
start sending me reminders soon. But yes, there is supposed to be another book coming out this year, later this year.
Awesome.
And yeah, so again on food, but sort of, adjacencies to, Masala Lab, if you will. So.
Cool. Yeah, we can go on and on for hours, but time is the villain here. I would take a moment to thank you so much. When Balaji introduced me to you, all it took was an email, and you happily agreed. Thank you so much. I know that it is quite late out there. You were peacefully answering all the questions. So thank you so much for that. And it was really insightful. And if you get a chance to kind of go through the comments, right, it's full of love and heart out there. So I have shared your book and then social media handles here. I'll do that again. Once again, thank you for joining the session, and participants, thank you all for joining and then putting the questions out there. It was indeed a great experience for me. And then once your next book is out, we'll definitely have you again to share your thoughts. Thank you
Absolutely.
all. So we'll have.
I remember.
Yeah,
so I was
please.
just, as a bunch of people kept asking me that, hey, how would you rate all the cities in India where you've eaten the greatest food, right? And I knew I had to, since to not upset anyone, I said I will call it A+, A minus, and things like that, so that I didn't say A, B, C, D. And for me, only 2 cities were in A+, which is Calicut and Calcutta.
Yeah. Okay.
And I put Lucknow and Delhi in one level below. And all the people in Lucknow and Delhi were very upset, saying that, how dare you say, what is this Calicut? I said, boss, you just have to go to Calicut to truly realize the stunning range of food. And I don't think anyone cooks in Calicut. Everybody's eating out all the time. The food is just so good and so